please join me in welcoming the Honorable Beto O'Rourke. Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good to see you.
Thanks for having me here.
Here we are in a different time zone than you're used to. It's a little early.
That's right.
We can just keep bringing the coffee up if you want, just to
good.
keep you awake. So you may have heard we have an election Tuesday.
Right.
4 days from now, and it will be over. And on behalf of America, let me say thank God that this election will finally be over. Who's going to win?
Hillary Clinton's going to win.
And what Nostradamus-like abilities cause you to believe that that's the case? Doesn't it seem close to you?
Well, the first thing I really should have said in answer to your question is this is the last year any one of us should be predicting outcomes for
oh my God,
political elections. I never
is that not the case? Boy,
yeah, never would have thought we would have been in this place talking about a Trump candidacy, seeing someone like him as the nominee of one of our two major parties. But having said that, looking at turnout trends in critical states, looking at turnout trends in El Paso, in
which
Texas.
We'll come to. It's been a great time for that. Right.
That makes me, I should say, cautiously optimistic.
Hopeful.
Yeah, hopeful.
Yeah.
But no, I can't predict.
But you think she'll win?
I do. Yeah.
And you're with her?
I am.
Took you long enough.
Took me a little while. Yeah.
You were one of the last Democrats in Congress to endorse Secretary Clinton, were you not?
I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Explain.
A lot of that has to do with respecting the voters who had yet to cast their ballots. I'm not a fan of the superdelegate system that the Democratic Party uses, where folks like I have a weighted influence on the outcome of the primary contest. I believe the voters in the various states, the voters in my communities, in my community, should be the ones to make that decision. And so I withheld, any comments on either of the two major candidates in the Democratic race until that last primary had taken place, and then I endorsed.
Right, but yes, but of course, Representative, you know that the Texas primary was in March, and you waited several months past March. You were worried that you were going to influence people like in Alaska? Is that the?
Yeah, because I am a superdelegate and a pretty big thing in Alaska right now.
You are. I will. That will be
big
the
in
headline.
Japan and Alaska.
The headline coming out of today will be Beto is a big thing in Alaska. That's right.
No, but because
the Eskimos love Beto. That's it.
Because I am a superdelegate, that is something that the candidates will point to. I have this many superdelegates in my camp. So yeah, out of respect for the process and concurrent with my belief that we shouldn't have superdelegates, I wanted to stay out of it until it was decided.
Okay, so that's the community college civics class answer, and I respect you for offering it. But the reality is, you were ambivalent about her. Question mark.
Yeah. Let me put it this way. I thought there was an extraordinarily healthy debate taking place within our party, represented by Secretary Clinton and Senator Sanders. And I think the ideas that especially Senator Sanders brought to that debate about fundamental questions about who we are as a country, what our values are, how our policy should align to that, how what we spend our money on should reflect the need and opportunities that we find in our communities. Ideas like tuition-free higher education, questioning our now 20-plus year history in the Middle East based on intervention and military solutions to problems that are fundamentally political and don't, I think, have a military solution. That was really important for us to hear and for Secretary Clinton to answer to. And I thought that was healthy for us, for the country, to extend that debate.
Has she sufficiently answered on those questions up to this point? I mean, she's obviously moved on the tuition-free college thing. You'd be forgiven for thinking that was her idea first, as she talks about it now. But she's still something more of a hawk than he is. That has not changed.
Yeah. That's a point where the Secretary and I diverge.
Yeah.
I'm deeply troubled by this country's history of intervention. And the fact that I'm 44 years old now. When I was a senior in high school, the first President Bush was announcing military intervention in Iraq. And here I am today raising my kids, and we're still in Iraq.
Talking about Mosul, right?
The next president will be in Iraq. So
right.
6, 7 successive presidents. That should tell us something. The old Albert Einstein maxim that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And so whether it was 2003 in Iraq, whether it was nearly 10 years later in Libya, I think we have to learn that we cannot militarily impose solutions on countries like Libya, like Iraq, like Syria, that are countries nominally, but don't function the way that we think of the United States, for example. They will not support a democratic system of government. They were never real countries to begin with. They were imposed political boundaries that are not sustainable unless you have a strong man or unless you have the kind of sectarian strife that has made those 3 countries of the 22 in the Arab world failed states. And I think we need a bold, courageous political solution to this dynamic. That's much harder work, frankly, than bringing the world's most powerful military to bear on the problems. I have no doubt whatsoever that militarily we will defeat ISIS. For me, that's a foregone conclusion. What I question is whether we will do anything to change the conditions that allowed for the creation of al-Qaeda, allowed for son of al-Qaeda, ISIS, and might allow for the son of ISIS, whoever that might be. It's bad enough that following our invasion of Iraq, we're back there once again, losing the lives of U.S. service members. What would be absolutely unforgivable would be to return yet one more time.
Right.
And so what's going to change? And I really challenge myself, my colleagues in Congress, and our next president to be part of that solution that's going to have to be different than what we've been doing.
Are you confident, based on what
years.
you've heard, Congressman, that she will be part of that solution? Or are you going to just work hard from the outside to persuade her? I just wonder how optimistic you are.
Yeah.
I mean, look, everybody I sit across from these days who's voted in this election says this is a binary choice. I'm voting for the person I either like the best or dislike the least.
Right.
You may not agree with Secretary Clinton on these issues, but you're making a binary choice. Are you going to be in a position to persuade her? Would you be in a position to persuade her, do you think?
I think so. Whether it's sitting on the Armed Services Committee and helping to develop our policy from the legislative branch,
right.
Whether it's working with her Secretary of Defense, whether it's talking with her directly.
You intend to press this issue?
I do. And I don't want to just press it in opposition to current policy. I think the real challenge is offering an alternative to that. So the question might be, Beto, so you don't like a military-first interventionist policy in the Middle East. It hasn't produced the results that we've been looking for. Right. What's the alternative?
What's the alternative?
And I think the United States has to play a fundamental role in facilitating the political changes necessary to ensure that those tribal, ethnic, and sectarian loyalties are accounted for, are represented perhaps in smaller states. Is Yugoslavia and the breakup of Yugoslavia that is tenuously holding right now, is that the model? I don't know, but I think that's something that is worth exploring. But certainly reconstituting Syria, Iraq, and Libya, and pretending that they're going to work going forward, right. Imposing that militarily, that to me, it's clear now is not going to work.
So let me just say, I appreciate the fact that this is the first time the breakup of Yugoslavia has come up at one of these events in 6 years. I want to stay with the campaign for a second before we get back to a lot of substance. So you disagree with her on some things, but you're with her.
Yeah.
I had your colleague, Congressman McCall, Chairman McCall, here a week ago, and I tried to make him own his support of Mr. Trump by saying to him, here is the bill of particulars, all the things he's done just since you spoke at the convention on his behalf. You good with this? I need to ask you about all the stuff that's come up with Secretary Clinton of late and over the course of this campaign. There are a lot of people who are with her, are supporting her, but feel like the baggage of the Clinton era from the 90s is not something they're particularly eager to see back in Washington. I feel obligated, turnabout is fair play here. I need to ask you, are you good with everything you've seen, with the possibility that there may be a litany of investigations of her by Congress and by the FBI if she is elected, that there's a possibility she could be indicted, that all the stuff that's come up over the course of this campaign is a little bit more than just the usual vast right-wing conspiracy. Are you good with this?
Yeah. Well, of course not. Of course I'm not good with everything that Secretary Clinton has done and everything that's ongoing right now that's connected to her. That should be obvious. But I'll tell you that for the priorities of the community I represent, El Paso, for the things that I think are important for this country and for the world, she represents the best opportunity to accomplish those. If it is comprehensive immigration reform, it is far more likely to happen in a President Clinton administration than it is in a President Trump administration. If we are to stop demonizing the U.S.-Mexico border, respecting those people that I represent who live there, my family, the neighbors, the friends, the 3 million people who constitute the world's largest binational community. If we're going to see a change in the rhetoric and the dynamic and the outcomes and the policies that follow that, that's far more likely to happen.
She's the better choice.
She understands the border. She campaigned there for McGovern in '72. She's campaigned there as a presidential candidate. She understands it. She respects it. She'll be someone that we can work with.
So not perfect.
No, and no one is.
And no one is.
And no one is.
You know, McCall has now gotten to the point where he's saying, well, we get her into office, the first thing we should do is impeach her. And, even a bridge too far for John Cornyn, no one's idea of a liberal, who was asked about this over the last couple of days, and Cornyn's like, pump your brakes on that. But Ted Cruz yesterday jumped on that bent, and possibly as much about 2018 as 2016. Ted Cruz yesterday said, we need to investigate her and prosecute her. Do you think that's what we're heading toward? Are we going to be locked in this kind of mortal battle over trying to get her out of office once we get her into office? And what do you think about that?
So some of these things really worry me. And I'm often comforted by the fact that we've been through some really heavy stuff in this country over the last 230 years. We've had a civil war from which we've recovered. We have suppressed entire populations from being able to enjoy their civil rights, from the right to vote, and have peacefully addressed it, not perfectly. We're not there yet, but we're making progress. We tend to take too long to do it, but ultimately figure it out.
Get there, right.
Some of the things that are being said right now, to me, represent a departure and a break from which I worry that we will not be able to recover. To have a major party presidential candidate say that he may not accept the outcome of a democratic election is something since the Civil War that I don't think has happened since the election of Lincoln in 1860 has not happened in this country. To have leaders in the Senate and in the House for that matter, but the Senate is more important in this case, say that for the next 4 years of a likely Clinton administration, we will not vote to confirm a single one of her Supreme Court nominations.
Right.
So that fundamental breakdown in this experiment that is America and our democracy is something that I think we should all be aware of and all understand what the implications might be. And one of those, it's in the realm of possibility. Hopefully it is very unlikely, but one of them is that we begin to change who we are as a country and what we're willing to accept, and this basic premise.
You see any evidence of that? We're punching reporters at rallies. I mean, the last 6 months have been some of the most dispiriting, just as a citizen, to watch what's happened over the last 6 months in politics. This doesn't look anything like the country I grew up in, I got to tell you.
So you have, as Speaker right now, somebody who was chairman of the Budget Committee, a policy and numbers and fiscal wonk in Paul Ryan. He's now the Speaker of the House, and the House has been unable to produce a budget, even though he leads the majority party.
And he was the solution.
Your government runs out of money on the 9th of next month.
But you've got a continuing resolution in place, do you not? Or we'll have another?
Through the 9th
Through the 9th.
But
We'll do a Band-Aid, right?
You hope so. When my first year in office in 2013, we shut down the government.
Right.
So it's not unprecedented for us not to be able to fund the government or to function. The point that I'm trying to make, whether it is not even holding a hearing on Merrick Garland, or saying that for the next 4 years you will not confirm a Supreme Court justice, or not being able to fund the government, or even produce a budget that would offer you a blueprint to do so, that helps explain the 9% approval rating for Congress, just ahead of gonorrhea, just behind communism.
What's your problem with gonorrhea?
Right. Well, it's climbing on Congress.
It is.
About to pass.
Let me ask you about you alluded to the early vote in El Paso County. I'm actually obsessed, the way some people are obsessed with baseball statistics. I've become obsessed over the last week with early vote numbers. El Paso right now is running 60%, El Paso County is running 60% ahead of 2012 in the early vote. I was exchanging notes. Eight people apparently like that.
And they're all from El Paso, which I really appreciate.
I was exchanging notes last night with Bob Moore, the editor of the El Paso Times, about the projected lead that Hillary Clinton has according to the nominal exit polls of the early vote that have happened in El Paso County to this point. And Bob Moore says, at least, that they understand that she's ahead by at least 50 percentage points in the Latino vote specifically in El Paso County, which is quite significantly up as it is elsewhere. Is this Trump or trend? Is this just Trump motivating the Latino community to turn out in larger numbers this time, or El Paso County to turn out? And after this election, it returns back to something more familiar, or is this now the first pebble in the path?
Yeah. Well, I hope it is the latter, of course. We don't in El Paso and in Texas have the strongest history and tradition of turnout, and it's deeply troubling. And I think it helps explain many of the problems that we have in this state.
You want to assert, without necessarily knowing for sure, these are Clinton votes? Do you know for a fact that the increase in turnout there or elsewhere is one party?
Yeah, I think it's very much connected to Secretary Clinton and to Donald Trump, for and against. I noticed Seth Krasny is in the audience. He was part of a group called We Fill in the Blank at Coronado High School.
Coronado High School, right.
And in 2012, when I was running the Hail Mary campaign for Congress, they were doing exit polling on this race that said that O'Rourke is ahead. Now, no one else believed it. No one's private polling reflected that. It was a foregone conclusion that someone who'd been in the House for 16 years, chair of the Intel Committee, a Mexican-American in an 85% Mexican-American community, somebody who was outspending his opponent 3 or 4 to 1, was just going to slam the door on this thing. And their polling actually tracked with the eventual outcome. It's that same group today.
Well,
so
let's stipulate that the Bob Moore numbers are their numbers.
So it is that group today,
right.
The inheritors of what Seth and his colleagues and classmates started, that are actually doing this exit polling. In fact, I saw them on the first day of early voting at the El Paso County Courthouse, where I waited in line for 40 minutes to vote. I've never, in my adult voting life that started at the age of 18, ever waited a second in line in El Paso to vote.
So something is going on.
Something is going on.
Right.
And I think that the challenge for us in El Paso and for us statewide, and I've read some of the data on the Texas Tribune site on this, the challenge is to sustain that. And when we do, only good things can come of that. Only representation that's more reflective of our communities, of our priorities, of our values, things that aren't being represented in the vote today.
Well, we know that El Paso County is up, and again, Harris County is up, Dallas County is up, but the border counties are up significantly, and the numbers are smaller because the populations of those counties are smaller, but the percentage increases are similar. And we talked a little bit about Trump and the border, and I'm thinking back to more than a year ago, you parading around, I think it was the summer of 2015, "The Border Makes America Great" was the hat that you had on famously. Right. You were early on this whole idea that the rhetoric of this campaign, and of Mr. Trump's campaign specifically, disrespected and misrepresented the border. I want to ask you about that. So, we've had many conversations privately and publicly about the degree to which the border is or is not properly understood by people who do not live there. Right. Whether the perception that the border may not be safe is or is not a fair and proper perception. My colleague, Julian Aguilar, Burgess High School class of 1995, El Paso guy, tells me that in Juarez in the month of October, there were more than 100 murders. It was the most violent month in Juarez in 3 years. Do we just not get it? I mean, do the numbers lie? Is it simply a case of statistics don't tell the whole story? Help me understand how this issue specifically ties to this campaign. Yeah.
So when you look at the border, the U.S.-Mexico border, all 2,000 miles of it from San Diego to Brownsville, it has never been, at least in my lifetime, more safe or more secure. El Paso, as you're probably sick of hearing, is not just the safest city on the border, not just the safest city in Texas, it's the safest city in the United States, and it has been for many years now. And it's not an outlier. San Diego is in the top 10 safest cities. The U.S. side of the U.S.-Mexico border is far safer than the average U.S. interior
And why do
city.
you think that is? If I had Dan Patrick up here, he would say, we spent $800 million in the last budget cycle on putting troopers every 5 feet along the border, so that you cannot literally go 5 feet without encountering another trooper. Right. We were right. We've done this, we would say.
I'll tell you why. 24% of the people that I represent in the 16th Congressional District were born in another country, most of them in Mexico. And they represent people who've made this incredibly difficult decision to leave their home country, their home community, move to a new country, a new community, speaks a different language with different laws, to be able to get ahead, and more importantly, to ensure that their kids can get ahead, to not just take from, but to contribute to our idea of America, to the American dream. They are the single greatest reason that El Paso is the safest city in America, that San Diego, that Laredo, that our border communities are so safe. Yes, we also have terrific local police forces, wonderful sheriff's department, a preponderance of federal law enforcement along the U.S.-Mexico border. But that alone would not explain it. It is the fact that we are communities of immigrants, people who are strivers, who want to get ahead, and are doing everything they can to do that. And part of that is living by the laws, going to school, being net contributors to our communities. That explains so much of El Paso's success, so much of the success of the state of Texas, so much of the success of this country. But it really comes to a point in El Paso. So it is not in spite of, but it is because of our connection to
when
Mexico.
statewide elected officials, as they did in 2014, run for office slagging the border, when they talk about the fact that the border is so unsafe and there's overheated rhetoric to the point that the chambers of commerce, business communities along the border are saying you are threatening the economic health of the border by scaring people to death. Right. They're lying?
Yeah, they are. It's great politics. To stoke the anxiety and fear that people have about those who are not like them, who speak a different language, who have a different
You think the people
color.
who run the state congressmen are racists?
I think there's a racist element to the rhetoric. I think that these people are far smarter than their public pronouncements would let on.
So should we the DPS has asked for another $1 billion in the next session, more than $1 billion. Yeah. So the $800 million that they got in the last budget, plus they've asked for an increase of, I think, another $300 million to continue this boots on the ground, troopers every 5 feet deal. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? And if we suddenly decided to go against that, to go back on that and take those folks away, would the border become less safe? Yeah.
So right now we're spending a record, this is federally, a record $19 billion a year to secure the border. In the last 15 years, we've doubled the size of the Border Patrol from 10,000 agents to 20,000 agents. We have record low northbound apprehensions, even with the arrivals from the Northern Triangle in Central America, which, by the way, are frightened little kids and young families who are not trying to evade detection but present themselves to Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection officers at our ports of entry. You compare the 330,000 apprehensions last year to the outset of the George W. Bush administration, there were 1.6 million apprehensions. We are funding a solution to a problem that we really do not have anymore. And you add to that the safety of the cities on the U.S. side of the border, you're long past the point of diminishing returns. So yes, the $1 billion is a god-awful waste of limited taxpayer resources, much better spent on problems that Texas really does have, where we rank near the bottom in educational attainment, near the bottom in mental health access, near the bottom in so many things that are so important to so many Texans.
Right.
That's what we should be redirecting those resources towards. Or if the border is of concern, then direct those resources to our ports, where we facilitate, just in the El Paso sector, $90 billion of U.S.-Mexico trade, connected to 6 million jobs nationally, 500,000 in the state, 1 out of every 4 in my community. So yes, this rhetoric is used for political gain. It plays upon the most base fears of the electorate. It is not connected to reality or facts. And it is up to all of us, myself, yourself included, to challenge those, to share the truth, the story of the border that presents, I think, a far more positive picture, and not a perfect one. And to end with where you started, we cannot comfort ourselves in El Paso with the fact that we are the safest city in the United States, because we are joined at the hip and connected in every way imaginable, economically, familially, historically, culturally, with Ciudad Juarez. And when there is a death in Ciudad Juarez, that's a death that we feel in El Paso. So that's why I think it's incumbent upon us to also be part of the solution. And this is not the silver bullet to it, but part of the discussion has to be our drug laws, our drug consumption in this country that fuels so much of that violence in Ciudad Juarez. It makes the plaza there one of the most critical points of entry for the illegal drugs in this insatiable illegal drug market in the United States, where kids, young men, are willing to die or kill others for the privilege of being able to work in that plaza. And that's precisely what is happening right now, but it's not limited to those working in that industry. It is taking folks from every demographic, every walk of life in Ciudad Juarez, including U.S. citizens who have ties to that community. So it's a very real problem. The culpability we share with Mexico, and I think the solution we need to share with Mexico.
You raised a couple things I wanted to bring up, and so I'm going to try to take them in the order that I think makes sense here, but I wish we had like 2 more hours to talk about just what you said. You were off, when you came off the city council in El Paso, when we were elected to Congress, people around the country went, oh, they elected that guy who wants to legalize weed to Congress. You had a reputation, fairly or unfairly, it may be more nuanced than that, as somebody who came into Congress thinking that we should totally overhaul the drug laws, legalize marijuana.
Yeah.
Is that still where you are?
Very much so, more than ever.
You're not supporting Gary Johnson?
No.
No. He probably would love your support, actually.
So in 2009, as bad as October was in Ciudad Juarez, and it was very bad, in 2008, 2009, certainly as you go through to 2011, you were seeing absolute horrific levels of violence in Juarez, barbarism that ISIS would be proud of, beheadings, mutilations, torturing people to death, to the point that Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, our sister city, became the deadliest city in the world, bar none. Out of that came my conviction that our drug problem in the United States, both the consumption and the prohibition, are a large part of the conditions that allowed for this to happen. And so we need to have this discussion, this debate. Out of that debate, not only did I become further convinced that our policies and our habits in this country lead to the death and the carnage in Mexico, but I've also learned what it does to this country, that we have the world's largest imprisoned population, that we are destroying the lives, primarily of young men of color, Latino and African American, in our major cities, ensuring that they will never have an opportunity to be productive members of their community, to be able to pursue an education, to be able to vote in many cases, to be able to contribute, pursue a career. We are shooting ourselves in the foot in this country with our drug policy. So yes, now more than ever,
being in
we
Congress
need to
has given
change
you
this.
even more of a perspective on this issue than
Absolutely.
you had before.
And we're there,
You know,
Republican and Democrat, we're there for the first time ever across party lines. We have voted to defund the DEA's prosecutorial activity in those states that have already legalized marijuana.
Well, criminal justice reform is a bipartisan issue, but legalizing drugs is not, right? I mean, you could not get a bill legalizing drugs through Congress.
I don't know. I'd love to be part of that effort to make that happen and to make sure, just because when I ran for Congress against Reyes, you said legalizing drugs. There were ads about, wonderful ads with cute 4- and 5-year-olds saying Beto wants to legalize drugs. Say no to drugs, say no to Beto. And the campaign literature was Beto wants your kid on crack cocaine. Beto wants your kid addicted to meth and heroin. What we're talking about, to be precise, is marijuana.
PolitiFact would say mostly false, right?
Yeah. What we're talking about is marijuana. And yes, it should be legal. And yes, it should be strictly controlled and regulated. And yes, it does not come without consequences. But today, $1 trillion later, marijuana is just as prevalent in our high schools. It's increasingly more available in our middle schools. And it is 5 to 10 times more potent than it was when we first began this war on drugs. So what we're doing today, back to Einstein's definition of insanity, is obviously not working. And we've seen, when you look at tobacco, a far deadlier toxin that kills many more Americans every year than does marijuana. We've treated it as a public health issue. And tobacco use amongst that same cohort in high school has dropped precipitously over the last 40 years, where it's becoming less and less cool to do that. And fewer kids are getting hooked and fewer Americans are dying. I think that may be a model that we should look at.
You bring up this issue in the next Congress if you're back?
Yeah, definitely. I'm
You
going to play a
vanquish
role.
your libertarian and green opponents on Tuesday? You go back and you bring this up?
Yeah.
You mentioned trade. I did want to ask about that. There's been quite a bit more sort of full-throated discussion of trade in this campaign than I think I anticipated at the beginning. I looked up the numbers again with the help of my colleague Julian Aguilar. $63 billion plus in the El Paso Customs District in two-way trade with Mexico from January to August. You estimated $90 billion a year, which would be about right. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, has become a big political football in this campaign. We have two major party candidates who both oppose it. President continues to be for it. Governor Kasich, who was the leading candidate for the Republican nomination, went so far as to go to the White House as a Republican, which is quite a sight to see these days, and advocate for it with the president. You, as I understand, have not taken a final position on this issue, correct?
Correct.
Why not? You surely have decided at least what you think about it, even if you haven't decided what vote you would cast. Why won't you tell us what you're going to do?
Yeah. Let me offer you a little context from El Paso's perspective. Perhaps the single greatest catastrophe and trauma, at least economically and in a very personal way to tens of thousands of families in El Paso, was NAFTA. The Department of Commerce certified 28,000 trade-related job losses in the immediate aftermath of its passage. And this failed economic strategy that unfortunately El Paso had pursued for the better half of the second half of the 20th century of becoming the low-wage, low-skill, low-value capital of North America. Bring your sewing, your light manufacturing, your assembly, your textile jobs to this community, and you can pay dirt cheap wages.
Right.
You can treat your workers any way you want to. There's infamously a Chamber of Commerce circular from long ago, maybe the 1950s, that talks about that and refers to those in El Paso who will work with their nimble brown hands to do this work for you. We won that bet. All of that came to El Paso. And following NAFTA, all of that left El Paso to pursue the next place where you could pay people next to nothing and have them in conditions that you were increasingly not finding in the United States. That informs what many of us in this community feel about TPP. But I've got to introduce another dynamic to this, which is that in the decades since the passage of NAFTA, El Paso has transitioned from a low-wage, low-skill, labor-intensive community, manual labor-intensive community, to a trade community. You know, I mentioned that $90 billion a year that's passing through our ports of entry every year. That's now connected to 1 out of every 4 jobs in the community that I represent. We are today very much a trading community.
Is that the long tail of NAFTA? Do you maybe have a different perspective on NAFTA today than you did before?
NAFTA is not a black or white. It is for many people in the community. I wouldn't blame somebody who lost their job because of NAFTA seeing it in those very black and white terms. NAFTA was bad for that family, undisputably, objectively. But for the community as a whole, post-NAFTA, you have seen wages, net wages increase comparatively pre-NAFTA, post-NAFTA. You've seen total employment increase. You've seen the value and the skill level of the jobs in our community increase. And much of that is connected to our role as a logistical center in North America for the trade that is passing through our ports, for the goods that are manufactured in Juarez, and for the supply manufacturing that's taking place in El Paso, and some of, but too little of, the very valuable design, engineering, higher value processes that are part of it. So that's part of the equation for me. And I've got to tell you, you mentioned our leading candidates, whether it was Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton now or Donald Trump, are all violently opposed to TPP. But there's someone for whom I have tremendous respect and whose judgment in large part I trust, and that's President Obama, with whom I've spoken at length about this. And I think that he is someone who shares many of the values that I do and that the community I represent does when it comes to competitiveness of our manufacturers, our exports around the world. Comes to labor standards that we want to see, not just in this country, but in our neighboring country of Mexico and far away in Vietnam. It comes to human rights standards that I think are American standards, environmental standards that are important to us. And while I think he'd be the first person to say that this agreement, negotiated with 11 other countries, is far from perfect, he would be the first to say that this marks an important step forward in a new standard for trade agreements globally, and that the United States has that unique opportunity to set that standard. And the opportunity cost, if we should fail to do that, is that there are other countries who are more than eager to do that.
Boy, it sounds like you're going to be for it. It just sounds to me like you're going to come in the end with a heavy heart and go, I have reservations, I have anxiety, but in the end you're going to vote yes.
Let me finish my thought.
Yeah.
One of the things that is almost unbelievable about this trade agreement that I got to see firsthand when I traveled with the president to Vietnam is that we were able to extract from that country something known as a consistency plan in TPP, where Vietnam, a communist dictatorship, will allow for, in this consistency plan, this binding consistency plan, independent labor unions, will allow for the confederation of those independent labor unions, with the benefit of understanding what happened in Poland under that dictatorial system and the rise of the power of those labor unions as an independent power source to the central government. They're willing to do that in order to be part of this agreement. I think that's an
positive sign.
Undisputable positive. Here's my concern, and this is the most significant concern I have, the need that has not yet been met, and the reason why I'm largely still undecided and certainly not ready to commit. There is no consistency plan for Mexico. Mexico does not have independent labor unions. They have sham syndicates that purport to be independent labor unions, but are not. These are organizations that make deals with the management of the corporations, the maquilas, the factories, before the first worker is hired. The workers have no voice and no say in their representation. And it helps explain why wages in Ciudad Juarez have not followed the cycle that you've seen in even some other repressive countries, where at first your value is how cheaply and how quickly you can work. And after a while, you build additional value in design, in engineering, in those additions that create real wealth and opportunity, allow people to step up social and economic ladders. That has not happened in Ciudad Juarez. People are being paid wages today that are not livable, that do not allow them to put food on the table. The folks who work in those factories in Juarez, in large part, shop in the same supermarkets that Amy and I do in El Paso. They buy their eggs in my community. They buy their milk in my community. They buy their jeans and their tennis shoes in El Paso, and they're being paid $40, $35 a week.
So if that doesn't...
That is not livable. That has not changed.
If it doesn't
and the
change,
administration's answer to this, to complete the picture, and I've met with Secretary Perez many times on this. I've met with President Peña Nieto when I traveled to Mexico City earlier this year on this subject. The promise is that the reason we didn't have a consistency plan with Mexico was that the president promised to introduce constitutional reforms and legislative reforms.
President Peña Nieto.
President Peña Nieto, that we're going to make these changes, that we're going to represent the kind of labor standards that we're asking for and going to get in Vietnam, that we count on in the United States and that we have failed to see in Mexico. And that will afford the Juarez maquiladora worker the opportunity to finally start to rise. I'm not seeing movement there. And that is deeply troubling to me. And if I cannot be convinced that we're going to see a change in Mexico, and most importantly Juarez, with whom we are inextricably connected in El Paso, then it's going to be very hard for me to vote yes. And that is where I'm stuck right now.
Okay, good. Well, that's a direct answer. Before we go to questions, I want to ask about you. What is your problem with people with experience serving in Congress? You know, I appreciate the instinct on term limits. You know, we should not have these, essentially monarchs running our government, people who are in for life.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just as somebody has been in long enough to have influence to get things done for their community and their constituents, knowledge of the issues and knowledge of the system, we're just going to summarily make them go. I mean, you might be at the peak of your effectiveness, peak Beto, at the end of 4 terms. And then because of a promise you made and sort of the principle of we think we ought to have new people in office, you're going to leave and El Paso is not going to be better for it. Isn't that one argument against term limits? Yeah,
that's a great argument. And this is not a black and white slam dunk issue. For me, it shouldn't be for anybody.
But you're committed to doing what you said.
But I'm absolutely committed. Personally, I've introduced with Jim Bridenstine, a Republican of Oklahoma, a constitutional amendment to allow us to do this. It's not going to pass.
Imagine that.
It's privately deeply unpopular. Publicly, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a lot of members of Congress who are going to be against it because it's so wildly popular. It's popular in some part because of the dysfunction that you and I were talking about earlier, the 9% approval rating for Congress, the inability to pass a budget, to address comprehensive immigration reform.
So there is no chance that you will walk away. Kay Hutchison, when she was the senator from Texas, talked about term limits and then ultimately did not honor the pledge or promise that she made implicitly or explicitly. And she's not the only one who's done this. You will not change your mind.
I won't change my mind. Let me tell you something. When I'm given a tour for El Pasoans in the Capitol, and I wish I knew the name of the artist, but my favorite painting is one of George Washington resigning his commission. That is the fundamental part of our foundational story, is the willing resignation of power. It's what's so troubling about Trump saying he's not going to accept the returns of this election. And then for him to set the precedent that he was not going to serve more than 8 years once he was elected president, at a time when he could have been emperor for life. We expect the president to be done with her business within 8 years. We expect the mayor of El Paso to serve.
I saw what you did there,
no more than 8 years. I'm confident that a member of Congress can be elected, be effective, make the necessary changes,
Right.
and artificially introduce some urgency into the chamber and into the process. And I think that will produce better results, not without, again, the potential for sacrificing some of the things that you just described. Last point. When I was first elected, was elected into a Congress where there were members who had served for longer than I had been alive. That was the sole voice, face, mind, perspective that community brought to bear on the most important issues of this country for generations.
Yep.
My leaving office by or before 8 years means that I have confidence and faith in El Paso. That Seth or some other El Pasoan is going to succeed me.
Did you just endorse Seth?
I just endorsed Seth for Congress. But there thankfully are tens of thousands of Seths in El Paso. That someone's going to bring a different perspective, experience, background, way of thinking about things, and we will be better represented.
And that's good for the
that.
community.
And that's good
Right.
for the community. That's good for Congress. It's
Right.
good for the nation. We are so in Congress unreflective of this country right now, unrepresentative of our communities, because when you're in office, you're locked in. 93% reelection rate from 1950 to 2016. There's something very wrong with that.
Well, but your term limits pledge only applies to the House.
It does.
Okay, so we have a Senate race in 2018 and then another Senate race in 2020. Cruz up, Cornyn up. Are you possibly thinking about running for something else, maybe moving over to the Senate?
I am.
Period, paragraph.
Yeah.
Who are you looking? Who are you looking at?
I'm not looking at a person.
Well, there's only one or two possible choices
Yeah.
here. I mean, should I flip a coin? What do you want to do?
Right.
Yeah.
Listen, we just.
Should I take that buyer before thing as a sense that you're considering possibly not serving 4 full terms because there's a Senate race in 2018?
Not because there's a Senate race, but I want to be honest with you. Am I looking at one of those 2 races? Yes. And I'm doing so because I think.
When was the last time somebody from El Paso ran and won statewide?
Never.
I knew the answer to that question.
So let me add a footnote to that.
Yeah.
Robert Ewing Thomason from El Paso, after whom we're in the process of renaming an old federal building because they took his name off the public hospital. He was in his 2nd term in the Texas legislature elected Speaker of the House. That is the highest statewide position an El Pasoan has ever attained. He then ran for governor and lost after being Speaker of the Texas legislature. Later served as mayor of El Paso, congressman from El Paso, and then had a distinguished career as a federal judge where he ruled in the case brought by Thelma White at then Texas Western, now University of Texas at El Paso, whose attorney was Thurgood Marshall, who wanted to go to Texas Western. She happened to be African American. They didn't allow her to attend. He made the ruling that effectively desegregated higher education in the state of Texas. That came out of El Paso. He was the judge. So he's somebody that whose career I look at and think about. But he, in terms of political accomplishment, was in many ways the high watermark. But to your questions about the border and who we are as Texans, I don't know that that's been effectively represented at a statewide level, at least in a very, very long time. And I think there's so much that's exciting about where I'm from and the people that I have the privilege of serving and representing. And I would love to make that case on a statewide level about what's so positive, what's so exciting about who we are as Texans, who we are as a people of the border, our connection to Mexico, not just through trade, not just through immigration, but culturally and demographically who we are today as a state. So for all those reasons and many others and some of the great work that we're getting done in Congress,
You're looking at it.
I'm looking at it.
Thank you for making news.
Yeah.
Let's go to questions for the balance of our time, and then we'll wrap up. Gentleman in the front, Mr. Lee.
Thank you for coming today. Thank you for coming today. I appreciate your comments.
Yeah, thanks.
Just 2 quick questions. One, given your comments about intervention by the military in the United States and the Middle East, are you satisfied with the level of the size of our military? And number two, are you also how do you feel about what Secretary McDonald has done with the VA? Are you satisfied with the progress being made?
Yeah, this is a big issue for you. As a member of the Veterans
Right.
Affairs Committee, you also represent a district that includes Fort Bliss, right?
Two big questions, so I'm going to not give them their due, but quickly on the first one, no, we actually are moving in the wrong direction. In the midst of a resurgent Russia, a near-peer threat in China, in the South China Sea, a nuclear North Korea, the fact that we're in active engagements, we're at war, let's call it what it is, in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan right now. Under this president, we've been at war or used military force in 6 countries total. We have U.S. forces stationed in 140 countries globally. This is the wrong time to be cutting our force size. If we're looking for savings within the Pentagon, there are other places to do it, including some of the installations we have in this country that serve no real military value. On the second question, I am a big fan of Bob McDonald's as Secretary of the VA, and even bigger fan of David Shulkin, who's his Undersecretary for the Veterans Health Administration. Despite that, I'm absolutely unsatisfied with the progress that we're making here. You have men and women going back to World War II and now just coming home from Afghanistan who've done everything that we've asked them to do, put their lives on the line and lost some part of their life in the process in many cases, and are still unable to get the care that's our obligation, our side of the bargain, that we are failing to fulfill. And so in El Paso, for example, where we've unfortunately had one of the worst performing VAs in the country for a very long time, you have veterans who are not waiting 2 weeks for a mental health care appointment, who come back with post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injury or military sexual trauma, who are exhibiting signs of suicidal ideation at a time that more than 20 veterans kill themselves every day in this country. You have veterans who aren't waiting 2 weeks, they are not waiting a month, they never get in at all. 37% of veterans, when we surveyed scientifically, objectively, with an outside group, veterans in El Paso were never able to get an appointment at the VA. That is absolutely unforgivable, unconscionable. It's my #1 priority in Congress, which is to reduce veteran suicide. And the best way to do that is to increase the number of mental health and behavioral health healthcare professionals at our VAs to leverage capacity in the community, our private tenant HCA, public hospitals, on those conditions that are not unique to service or combat, and allow the VA to focus on those things that it should and historically has been able to do better than anyone else. I'm happy to say that in Texas, and specifically El Paso, we're beginning to model what that's going to look like. And those other outside providers are taking that overflow. We've gone from 68 behavioral specialists at the VA to 104 today in the time that I've been in office. I'm making the recruitment calls to those psychiatrists who are living in Cleveland or San Francisco or New York, selling El Paso, talking about the difference that they're going to make, and then working with Shulkin and McDonald on taking this model and having it reflected in what we're doing nationally, where we are 43,000 clinical positions short in the VA nationally. We'll never hire that number. We'll never be able to build enough hospitals to solve the problem. We've got to be more effective and more intelligent with resources that we already have in our communities, and we're doing that in El Paso.
Have you considered going into an administration in some capacity on this issue? You sure sound like somebody who cares a lot about this issue and knows a lot about it, and they're going to be looking for a Veterans Administration Secretary in the next. Have you thought about that?
No, you're asking me questions about things that would I do in the future?
Yeah, we just had a whole conversation
That's
about
right.
what you do in the future.
And look, and I want to
Newsflash,
Yeah.
that's part of this topic.
And one of the things I want to do out of respect to you and the folks who are here and those who are watching is I want to be honest. And so I feel like we are very effective in what we're doing on the Veterans Affairs Committee in the House, in what we're doing in El Paso outside of that committee. I love that work. I want to continue to do that work. If I felt like I could be more effective doing that somewhere else,
Outside rather than inside.
I'll do it.
Very good. Gentleman in the back, young man in the front, and then we're going to have to wrap. Right, so we'll go 1, 2. Sir.
Hi, Congressman. I'm Bob Cash. I'm with the Texas Fair Trade Coalition. I wanted to thank the congressman for meeting with members of our organization multiple times in the last year and a half about the TPP. But the question I had is that given your concerns about the lack of labor reform in Mexico and how that affects the economy in El Paso, the president has made it clear that he wants to try to pass the TPP during the lame duck session between now and, I guess, Christmas Eve. Given the fact that there is no evidence that labor reform is moving forward in any way in Mexico, I guess two questions. Do you think it's a good thing to have a lame duck Congress vote on something that's important? And if the vote does come and there's no evidence of any kind of labor reform in Mexico, how would that affect your vote?
Are the votes even there in Congress if you did it in a lame duck session?
I don't know. Both Senate Leader Mitch McConnell and House Speaker Paul Ryan have said that they will not hold a vote in the lame duck for the concern that you alluded to. Should we be making consequential decisions in the lame duck? And maybe more practically, because they don't see the votes there. But you're right that the president is not relenting in pressing the case and trying to get that vote. So assuming that there will be a vote, and I have no reason to assume that there will be, but I know as much as you do on this. As I said to Evan just now, it would be extraordinarily difficult for me to vote for TPP if the status quo in Mexico persists. If there's no fundamental change in the trajectory that we see for labor, for workers, for people, for humans in the community that I live in, and they just happen to be on the Mexican side of this community, who are working in jobs that are just not sustainable. And it's terrible for them. It's awful for their families. I think it actually, in some way, is connected to the violence and the instability that we've seen in Juarez, where we've industrialized incredibly quickly over the last 2 or 3 decades. And there hasn't been concurrently the investment in the social infrastructure, the educational institutions, the job training, the ability for you to start on that factory floor and then move up to something else. It just does not exist in Juarez today. And out of that, people look for other opportunities, and some of those are those that contribute to this violence.
Just game theory for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
So the votes in Congress may or may not be there. Even if the votes are there in a new Congress, they will not have a veto-proof majority, presumably, on this issue. She's opposed to it. If this thing is going to get passed, it's going to have to get passed in the next 2 months.
So,
right?
so let me use this as an opportunity to ask this next question that I'm asking myself, and I think we should all consider. If not TPP, if not now, then what and when? Do we think if Congress rejects TPP, either by voting it down or not taking it up at all, that the 11 countries, the 40% of the world's economy with whom we've been negotiating for the last half decade, will all come back to the table and agree to a better, different, more positive deal for the issues that we are all concerned about in this room? The answer is we don't know, right? If we're honest with ourselves, perhaps we will. Perhaps they'll say, you know what? The U.S. is the world's biggest economy. That's the market we want to get into. We're willing to sit back down again, as painful and embarrassing as this is. Or you could have a Brexit moment where the rest of the continent in Europe says, you know what, screw you. We're going to move forward with what we're doing, and you no longer will retain the privileges and the access that you once had, and you're going to have to sleep in the bed that you just made. So I think the what next, and if we really care about labor conditions in Malaysia, or more importantly for me in the United States, in El Paso and Texas, in Mexico, if not TPP, what will our leverage be to force that change that we so desperately need? We can't, even if TPP fails, cannot give up on affording that Juarez maquila worker a better opportunity in life. And I think we need to stay on that.
We're technically out of time, but I'm going to take your question. But let's do a fast question, sort of game show speed round, if you don't mind. Fast question, and then we'll do a fast.
Sure. My name is Alonso. I'm originally from El Paso. And first of all, I want to say that I really appreciate you asking the community's feedback on the TPP. And so one of the things the biggest concern of mine about the TPP is its ability, if it's enacted, to give corporations the ability to sue countries for loss of profits. we already see, just for example, what's going on with North Dakota, the big battle going on there, how much power and influence the corporations have over the community. And as a side note, there's a similar smaller scale pipeline going on in El Paso and with the community's concerns. So
what's
what
your
are your
question? What's your
opinions
question?
about the ability for corporations to sue
Yeah.
countries?
Yeah, let me address that. I think that's a really important part of this agreement. It's ISDS, or Investor State Dispute Settlement, which would allow corporations from the 12 TPP member countries to be able to sue governments if they are unfairly applying the laws to foreign national companies as opposed to domestic companies. And so, the example that's often given of proponents of ISDS is that if Vietnam is treating, their auto parts supply company under one set of laws, and then treating Ford Motor Company under a different set of laws, Ford Motor Company would be able to sue the government of Vietnam within the ISDS process. In other words, to level the playing field where we feel that state-controlled corporations and legal systems that don't match ours for transparency and fairness aren't going to get the job done. Now, the fear that I share, it's a real concern, is that could that then be applied to the United States in a way that was not anticipated, but could affect our public health laws? Tobacco was a concern about the ability for tobacco companies to sue governments, including ours, when the city of Austin says we are going to ban smoking in public places. Tobacco is actually included in TPP as one of those areas that cannot be included in ISDS. But I think that's a legitimate concern. This is a different standard of legal review and one that may have unintended consequences. And I think we need to go into this eyes wide open. And yet at the same time, I think there's merit to the idea where you don't have a competitive level, you don't have a competitive playing field because of disparate judicial systems in these 11 countries. Here is a standard that all 12 countries will agree to. So there's a lot of legitimate concern around it. I do want to make sure that I also am looking at the reasons why this was included, why the president feels like this is a net plus for the United States. But that's one of these factors that we're going to have to consider before we make a decision if there's a vote in the lame duck session.
Okay, we've run out of time. Give Congressman O'Rourke a big hand.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. We'll see you again.
Yeah.
Great.